So let's officially start. Hello, my name is Kevin Clark. I'm the moderator for this talk on the Fire Escape. Our guests today are Marion Spencer and Sidra Bell. Quick bio for each of them. Sidra Bell is a choreographer, master teacher, artistic director of Sidra Bell Dance New York, and currently a master lecturer at the University of Arts in Philadelphia, an adjunct professor at Ball State University in Indiana, was the artist in residence at Harvard University, among others. She has a BA in history from Yale University and an MFA in choreography from Purchase College Conservatory of Dance. Bell has received commissions from institutions and companies, including Body Traffic, Ailey 2, Juilliard School, University, Boston Conservatory, River North Dance Chicago, NYU Tisch, School of the Arts, Sacramento Ballet, Ballet Austin, Alonzo King's Lions Ballet School, among many others. The list goes on, including Springboard Dance Montreal, Uppercut Dance Theater in Denmark, and Motto Dance Kollektif in Turkey. Her alternative pedagogy, Contemporary Systems, was featured in Dance Magazine, Dance Teacher Magazine, and Dance Studio Life Magazine. And she is the creative director of the award-winning Module, a New York City-based immersive laboratory for movement and theater artists. Our second guest, Marion Spencer, is a dance artist based in Brooklyn, New York, currently researching energetic and tonal collaging, sourcing intuition and imagination, calls for transformation through an undoing of the self via rigorous physicality and rigorous empathy. Her work has been shared in Dance Space Project, Give Dance, Brooklyn Studios for Dance, CPR, Movement Research at Judson Church, Triskelion Arts, Green Space, Dance Hollow, and the Domestic Performance Agency. She's a 2019-2020 season artist at the Chocolate Factory Theater, creative residency in December, and Gimney Solo for Solo, spring 2020. Her choreographic work and teaching practice is throughout Seattle, Amherst, and her former home of New Orleans. She has worked with Band Portier, Laura Peterson choreography, Yaquez Larissa Velez-Jackson, Michelle Boulay, Athena Kokoronis, Shenandoah Goldman, Melissa Riker, Annie Kloppenberg, and Sean Irons and Lauren Petty, among others. She currently teaches class through Free School, Give Me, and Dance Wave, her quotes, not mine, from her bedroom in Brooklyn. Welcome to you both. Glad to have you both.
Thank you.
Mary,
Thank you.
Yeah, you had a question brimming on the tip of your mind before.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Kevin. And it's such an honor to be here with you, Sidra. I was curious, as our conversation was already beginning before the formal introductions, we were speaking a little bit about what our life and sort of spatially has been like since this began. And I was just sort of going to pose to Sidra to hear a little bit more about how this process has been for you, perhaps on a personal level, but also perhaps on a creative level, of more kind of the map and the journey of the last 8 weeks in terms of how you've landed now.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I think there was a sense of, we actually had a number of tours and things canceled in those first few weeks. And that felt like the first kind of realizations and trying to grapple with the sort of terrain becoming unstable. And so straddling that was a whole state of being for me. My 5 dancers, we were all expecting to be working through April. And so there was a lot of like coordination and trying to both take care of them, but also think about the things that were suddenly happening to us as a global community. So there's a lot of quick decision making and navigating how we would manage financially and create an infrastructure to survive. And so, you know, applying for grants and sitting in different Zoom rooms and panels and working with different pro bono services to navigate this time, which has been a huge learning curve and actually somewhat of a gift to have actually the space to consider these things. I think as artists, we're already always on this sort of unstable map that we're building, and the pause has given me a moment to really consider the infrastructure of the company, what we've done, and what can happen as we move to this new phase of existence. I think of this as sort of my second wave. I was in New York during 9/11. I had just turned 22. I had just gotten out of college, so it was the fall of 2001, and that created this entire world shift and how we existed in New York. I had lived in New York my whole life, and I think this is kind of my second wave, and
Oh,
thinking about the changes. And what's been really interesting being an educator and thinking about when I was 21, 22, my students now and how they're absorbing this time. And I've had to do a lot of distant learning platforms and developing those with 3 different institutions. With University of the Arts, I teach sophomores, and we've had to create a new platform called Homeschool. And then Marymount Manhattan College, I was in the middle of creating a piece, and I'm actually working with them twice a week in rehearsal. And I'm also mentoring MFA students at Hollins and UArts and trying to get them through their final projects. So it's been from that time of instability and then moving into trying to facilitate my communities has been just a stepping up and figuring out how to both translate, communicate, reach out, and be more generous, so that it becomes less about my journey through the pandemic, but actually like holding everyone together a little bit. So we're actually kind of towards the end of the semester now, and things are accelerating into performance platforms and modes of engagement. And I've been doing collection of ephemera and gathering them into different kinds of like book platforms and videos. And so that's been also another learning curve, like immersing myself into various modes of technology and
yeah,
scholastic enterprise.
yeah. I wonder about access and students who go to college from places that have various levels of support, various level like their family home, from places that just don't like maybe if you're in a very rural space, like access to the internet may not be as good as if you're in a metro area. What challenges have come up from that that you had to face or help people through?
I'm really proud of both of the schools I'm working with, that they considered that right away. University of the Arts has a really inclusive and progressive mode of education in general, I find. So when things moved to this sort of online platform, our dean, Donna Faye Birchfield, was like really resistant of this just throwing everything online
Yeah,
idea. She wanted to create another kind of space in which there's a flexibility to the engagement. And
yeah,
so if the students can't show up synchronously because of a home environment or
mhm,
multiple situations that are happening, some of their parents are on the front line. They really do have a flexibility in with how they can receive the information. So the classes live online. There's also these ephemera studies that we're doing, and we've been reaching out on the phone. We have this area called the Love Cafe where we can just be in a chat room together, just talking about other things. So there's a lot of different components in that. And Marymount as well, I think there's been a real like generosity of spirit and understanding that these are young people and they come from extended families that are dealing with a lot. And so we've had to be more flexible as educators and really open up our homes as well, and let them know that we're all in this situation simultaneously. So that's been really great for me. I think I visit a lot of schools, and this is, I think, the most entrenched I've been, I think, on a personal level with my students, because I'm not full time anywhere. So because of the situation, I've had to dig a little deeper into personal communication than I might normally have if I'm just visiting on a commission or guest teaching.
Mhm,
yeah,
mhm. It's so interesting to hear about how how it is to navigate institutions right now, even as somewhat of a visiting artist or in residence for a semester, the different roles that you have, Sidra, at the different places where you work. It's so interesting to me to hear how different institutions are navigating it in such different ways by the needs of the
Hmm.
students. Of course, hopefully that's where they're um,
Yeah,
coming from in terms of
I
their
think,
intentions.
yeah, we've been, I think, really lucky, the two that I'm like heavily involved with now. I also had pieces kind of in mid motion Tish was kind of in mid-motion. It was supposed to happen maybe in April. It had already been performed in the fall, but again, it was like, what's going to happen? And they just canceled the shows. And I had a piece in Texas that was supposed to go up with a high school and Skidmore College as well. And so I've kind of been lucky enough to like have all these emails actually from all these institutions because I get all this information. How are they doing, and how are, I have a lot of like kind of these bridges that I've created over my career. So I'm getting an ear into a lot of different modalities and how people are grappling with the situation.
How is that working with student pieces? Because I imagine with your company, what you all are doing looks very different than potentially what a group of students at Skidmore that learned the dance last semester are doing.
For me, it overlaps. I mean, I'm a singular choreographer model, even in the company structure. So as I'm traveling nomadically, there are various kinds of communities, whether they're professional dancers or students. I am researching and bringing that information back into my small group. And occasionally, actually more often than not, in the past 5 years, the company dancers are with me on a residency in a school. So the information definitely stacks for them, or I may send material back to them. These are the ideas I'm kind of thinking about. And so for me, it definitely has this stacking situation. That was sort of, I think this idea of bringing them with me on commission more often was a way of conserving myself as well. So that the things that were being developed were already like being implanted into their bodies. So we've done a lot of that in recent years at Lines. The dancers have been with me, and Drexel University, and whether I'm workshopping or creating, they're often with me.
Mm-hmm. Marion, you're a solo artist, right? You don't create with a group necessarily.
Well, funny you ask that. So for the last few years in New York, in terms of my own work and performance, I've mostly worked solo and independent, but I began a group process with 7 amazing collaborators this winter while I was in residence at the Chocolate Factory, working on a solo work, which is pretty far along in its development and life. And we began a group process that feels like a project that is separate from, but in conversation with, this solo that has been brewing. And that group process is very new.
Yeah.
And that group process is very new, and we sadly had several residencies and performances so far this spring and summer be canceled. And these sharings, because we're so new in the process with this group, these sharings and residencies were opportunities to just continue the process of working together. And I'm actually finding myself right now in a virtual residency with these collaborators, partly supported by the New Dance Alliance, where we were supposed to be performing sort of the next version and progress of this group piece in early June at Performance Mix Festival. And that was, of course, canceled, but they have shifted the festival into an online format for the entire month of May. And so on Wednesday next week, we will be sharing sort of both visual and film process. And we see it not necessarily as a product, but as just a sharing of our research and a sharing of what our process looks like right now. But we will be completely sharing things that have come out of our virtual residency together. So I'm also deep down the rabbit hole of trying to learn Premiere Pro and editing, and I still haven't even started with Adobe
Premiere
Illustrator.
Is so hard.
Yeah.
I know. Thank my
Adobe
poor friend.
They're both so complicated.
Yeah, I'm starting to slowly get the hang of it, but it's been, it's a steep learning curve, and many, panic attacks and many calls to my friends who are filmmakers.
Yeah.
But it's also, I don't know, there's a part of me that when this began, so I pretty much operate as a fully freelance, fully gig economy artist, emerging artist in New York. And in the last year of my life, I think year, maybe 2, but recently was when I made the sort of jump and switch, which at the time felt like such a sort of achievement or accomplishment, that all of my income and work was dance related and artist career related. And letting go of the babysitting and the coffee shop jobs, and those will probably come back in at some point down the road, but to be able to operate fully and full time as a dance artist felt like something that I had sort of worked for and dreamt for and arrived at. And then within the span of 24 hours, to have all of that completely taken away on March 12th, 13th, whenever that day was a huge shock. And I am not salaried anywhere. I am fully paid freelance for what I show up for and what I do. And so that was a real reality for myself and for so many of us in the dance community and in the art community and beyond, obviously. And so for me, I'm incredibly lucky because within the first few days of this happening, several of my teaching gigs that are at not institutions, but not at academic institutions, but at sort of studio or nonprofit organizations in the city, transferred to online formats. And I was invited to have weekly classes or have my regular classes transferred to online formats. And so I'm lucky that I've had the support to sort of figure out how to navigate and teach classes online, and learn this whole new language and learn how to figure out what people need right now and how to stay curious and excited. I was asking a lot of questions when this first began of shifting my teaching practice, which was the first practice that shifted online for me, because the first couple of weeks were just sort of survival mode. I need grocery money. So, if you are asking me to teach dance class on Zoom, I'm like the most low-tech person, truly. And I was just like, yes, great. I don't even know what Zoom is, but I'm going to teach a dance class on Zoom this weekend. Sure, great. And so it was very much another, like we're talking about the learning curve with Premiere Pro, the first week of the pandemic, after the first few days of just shock and making sure that loved ones were in safe places and okay, and myself as well. Then it just became just this mad dash run to figure out how to get a little bit of income right now. And it's mostly, teaching has actually for me been an incredibly necessary practice right now. It's actually it was hard, and it's been hard, and I miss dancing with people in space more than a lot of things right now. But it's been something that feels like a service that I can offer to people. And all of the places and spaces where I'm offering class are all either free or donation based. And that feels really important to me right now, to be offering class for anyone, regardless of whether they can pay or not pay right now. But it feels, I think I had this whole moment, and I feel like artists in general, or at least conversations I have with artist friends in general right now, we're talking about just how creative practice feels so important and also feels so navel-gazing to be an artist. And to some extent, these are conversations that artists have. So I have often as an artist and as a white artist. And I think there's something about teaching right now that feels okay and feels good, in that this is a service that I can give to people. This is something I can do to help. I feel like so many of us I am sitting in my home just being like, what else can I do? And part of the sort of the double-edged sword is that in many ways, the most that we can do right now to help our communities is to stay home and not leave. And for me, it feels like if I can help people to connect to their bodies and to feel in community and feel seen, and see others and be with others for an hour once a week, and get in their bodies and get creative, then that feels like sort of a reason to get up in the morning right now. So that feels, I'm grateful to have that practice right now.
Yeah, that's a big question right now. I think there are two really interesting things that came up in the conversations there, which are um, how we become more responsible for the multifaceted skill set that comes with being an artist. Like being a dancer, being a teacher also encompasses now like learning Premiere Pro or learning how to edit movies and film and learning how to learn new technologies really quickly, which I think I get the feeling, and I'm sure there are many industries where you like need many divergent skills, but being an artist feels like you need like you need to be able to be good with photography, you need to be good with music sometimes, like you need like there's so many skills that are involved in this, and learning how to teach and knowing how to dance are two separate skills as well, even though the skill base is still the same. How are you, I know for me it feels overwhelming often to continuously feel like there's just another thing, another skill that I need to learn to stay relevant, another like facet of my thing. Instagram was already really hard for me to like become acquainted with. I'm generally not a super social person as far as like media goes. Facebook I tend to watch and not observe. Um, but these skill sets that we're climbing onto are what are allowing us to stay connected right now, which is kind of this interesting parallel between like what we can give and what's required of us as people who want to have an influence in the field. Um, what's I don't know if there's a good question to come out of this, but I think that there's something to be said about the amount that is asked of us or that is required of us in order to do this art form. Um, Last week we talked with Hollis and Natty, and they were talking about how being an artist in general has really prepared us for this life of um, being a survivor in some sense. Like, okay, I can paint. You need me to like I can figure out how to paint, and like I can figure out how to saw. You want me to saw? I can saw. Like, this is very interesting world we live in, you know. Like, and so I guess my feeling on that is that how does that feel, you know? How does that feel to be
Yeah,
like,
for me, I mean, this has been, I'm going almost into my 20th year of creating in New York. Um, started so early when I was, again, 21, 22. And for me, it was always this sort of floating around, like satelliting the institutions,
mhm,
because coming out of really a self-produced model, which I think we all inherently do as artists in New York, and around the world. I think New York is singular in that way, in that
yeah,
in order to navigate such a hard city to survive in economically, and then when you add being an artist on top of that and working with um, material that can't really be commodified in a certain way, it was always about how can I output. And actually, in the early days, there wasn't really any social media. So it was like letter writing, and it was putting together packets, and it was doing photo shoots on Canal Street.
oh,
It was, yeah, I've actually been looking a lot, in this time of isolation, and through my like early papers. And it's been interesting to see the progression of how we were always like just producing in any way that we could. It was always guerrilla style. Um, so for me, like the platforms of social media just sort of gave that a form. But these were the things that as a self-produced young artist, I was already having to do. I couldn't afford to have really expensive videography or have someone edit that together. So I had to learn these skills really early on, and connect with people in my community that could help out with creating aspects of production. So that's something I feel prepared by, but I have at times during this time of isolation also grappled with a lot of self-doubt. Because I think when you're in this space of communicating through the screen, it feels like, well, what is the thing I'm trying to communicate? Even as a teacher, I've been teaching for many, many years. And I just think that this like shifts the narrative, like energetic expression, and the things that you react to and respond to in the studio are just so different than on this platform, which you have to kind of premeditate a little bit more. And I'm lucky, kind of the same, that I've had these areas of kind of closed communities that I've been able to work with before sort of bringing out a public platform yet. Because I feel like really privileged to be working with university students and figuring stuff out and failing and, you know, things not working, even just, you know, technologically with like microphones and earplugs. And so I think there's a lot more to navigate that is just a necessity now. But I think we've always been doing that as an artist community.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sidra. And I also think pretty much every time I teach class, whatever organization or platform it's through, I do it differently right now. And each class feels like a different experiment. And there are elements and things that I'm working hard to preserve from my in-person classes, and I am really trying to just like crack it wide open and not try to recreate a mediocre version of what we would have in the studio, but instead try to really ask what else is possible, I guess, right now, because we are in our teeny bedrooms for many people in New York City, in terms of who, you know, class following and relationships I have from teaching class in New York primarily. And so that has been something really interesting. And I think it's changed my teaching practice for forever. I almost don't want to go back. I want to go back to class in person, 100%. But I almost don't want to go back to teaching the class that I taught before this, because I'm excited about all of the different ways that I'm thinking about work and practice and creativity and dance class and movement. And I'm excited about the different things that we are investigating together in the container of class right now. And it's sort of opening up my idea of what dance class is and what dance class can be right now. And I don't know how that will be able to continue evolving and living, but I trust that it will, because as artists, that's what we always do, is through resiliency, continue to reinvent and improvise and learn from experiment, learn from mistake, sometimes learn from success. But yeah, it's interesting because I'm asking a lot of questions in terms of thinking about work and work making. I'm curious to hear, Sidra, how it's navigating for you, because there's a part of me, I don't know exactly what I think about this yet, but there's a part of me when I think about creative practice in terms of my work. I'm asking a lot of questions right now about how the choreographic eye can translate to other mediums, because I know and I trust that it can. How can the choreographic eye, which in so many ways is thinking about, you know, rhythm and color and intuition and speed and, you know, architecture, how can that translate to making a collage? Or how can that translate to making a dance film? Or how can that translate to making a zine? And it's interesting because when I started working on this film that I am sharing on Wednesday as part of New Dance Alliance, the first couple days of working on it, I was interested, and I was interested to continue learning this new software and this new skill and navigating all of this amazing process and footage that my collaborators had sent me. And there was part of me that was like, this isn't my work. This is my process and this is my research, but this does not feel like we are sharing this dance. This does not feel like we are sharing the experience of live performance. And I feel like, I don't mean to sort of bring in a negativity right now, because I am all for resiliency and, you know, embracing all of these new things and sort of being optimistic within that, because we're going to be in this for a while. And I want to be able to stay creative and hopeful through that. But there is part of me that in this experience of making in the last week, making a product that sort of is going to be represented as my work in some way, I'm like, this doesn't feel like my work. I don't know. It's the live component of it, and with the magic that can hopefully happen from being in space with other bodies and sharing work live with other bodies. That is a piece of the puzzle that I'm really struggling with, how to
how to communicate that through the portal of a screen.
Yeah, I'm in an experimental mode right now as well, and doing a lot of, I feel like I'm curating right now with my student work. You know, they're submitting things. It's not, I don't think of it as being my choreography. I think of myself as sort of facilitating this other space. And I think, again, that was encouraged really early on by the institutions I was working with to kind of resist the nostalgia. Was something that was stated really clearly. And so I took that and kind of ran with it. And so every session that we do synchronously is different. And we may do an improvisational, durational score, or we may not have our cameras on at all and just listen to sound and know that we're all moving together. We may have dialogue, we may have meditation. The assemblage of their works is taking form as a book. That I've created through Blurb. And again, these were things I'd been kind of lightly exploring through my career. I'd created another book 10 years ago of photography with a collaborator of mine. And it's like, oh, I can do that again for my students. It's not that hard. It's actually been really labor intensive now, you know, curating how I want the pages to dance and how I want their words to dance on the page. And then the video work too, I'm kind of curating, like, what would I direct? You know, how would I direct this moment? I can't see everything. I don't want to see everything. It's not necessary. So it's really, for me, like distilling and extrapolating ideas rather than thinking about it as my work. It's like our work together. So I haven't really kept rehearsals going with the company because it didn't make sense for where we were in our seasonal year. We were going to be in Europe when the pandemic really hit, and that was our big sort of collaborative project that we were doing. And I've been in conversation with some of the collaborators I've been working with. They're like, what happens if we take some film and then like sort of superimpose a dancer in, and what if we start working with 3D technology? So there have been conversations starting, but I think that's like the next chapter of my time in isolation once I'm done with the school semester stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think something, so you said something that I typed in, resist the nostalgia, and then Marion, you mentioned something where you're trying to keep the negativity out. Something that we found, my company is still trying to have like rehearsals, but not in the sense of like trying to create a product necessarily, because there's a big question mark about what will be the time frame for live performance to even become something that not even allowed, but I think it'll take a lot of time for people to feel comfortable going to large public gatherings, especially in New York. And so part of what has been really clear for us is that we need to actually engage with the negativity. We need to engage with the struggle and the discomfort, and be honest with ourselves about how we're feeling, because something that keeps coming up is the reminder that we're not just working from home, we're working through a crisis, and we're trying to stay alive and stay both in here and in general. So I'm interested in I think there's a question about what success and what, whatever that word, it's a very loaded term, but what that feels like right now and how it felt and how that word has changed. Especially between you two as artists who, one is maybe at a very beginning part of your career, and somebody who's been in your field for quite a while and done amazing things. Like, I'm sure originally these terms had very different meanings for you both before this crisis began, and then now we're in a totally new landscape. So how does that word ring for you? What emotions does it bring up? What conceptions at this time, if anything? Like, it feels almost like dead words.
I think for me, it's been, again, I think that the pause almost amplified things that are already in motion for me as an artist. I'm trying to think of like how you draw a wave timeline of your life, I guess. And I think having I'm kind of like really on the edge of the millennial arc and
Mhm.
post. So, but I kind of started when things were changing technologically almost very quickly.
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of the early days weren't about being seen. It just really wasn't about that. We were
Yeah.
again coming together as, I mean, can speak of my like amazing collaborators from that time, and there was no money and there was sometimes no space, and we were rehearsing on street corners, and we were, you know, trying to like put things together out of like bed sheets, like set design, and so like I'm so happy that I had that time and it wasn't about being seen, and a lot of the work was really raw. um, and I kind of was, I think for me, you get to a point where you're producing a lot, and I think I was starting to feel like something was missing, and that sense of gathering was starting to become, things were becoming desensitized in our field. And so I think there was, over the past 3 years, I felt this sort of longingness, and I didn't know where to locate that. Um, Loneliness, even though I have so many people around me all the time in the dance world. It's just this like, for me, there was a dissonance in where I was like sort of emerging emotionally and what was happening in the field. So I feel like this pause, for me at least, is a time to reflect and actually not to output and think about what's next, but like to sit and what has been and like enjoy that and be grateful for that. I'm not sure what the next, I think that's what's so interesting, is like no one knows. So
Yeah.
there's nothing to really precipitate, and that kind of pause is very unusual. I think like to have a global pause. You have events that happen, like, oh yeah, that happened over there, but I'm gonna still keep going. Have that cognitive dissonance. But in this situation, we are all in it. Um, and so I'm trying not to precipitate too much. I'm not worried. I think, but also I have the privilege of not, I have family structure, I have a home, and I have a history. And so I'm not worried for myself. I'm more kind of thinking about how I can be supportive of, you know, the people within my community. So I think for me, and I think that just naturally happens, the emphasis shifts. You're not so self-involved as
Yeah.
you go through your career. So I've enjoyed kind of slowing down.
Yeah.
I mean, there are definitely times where I'm feeling like I just want to scream, but mostly I think what was already in motion in terms of like settling into my identity as an artist was already happening, and I don't feel the fear.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, there's some heavy reggaeton happening outside my window right now, all of a sudden.
Great. Great.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think for me, it's been, I felt very connected with my collaborators because we were in sort of a mini residency the week that everything shut down, because we were preparing for a performance the weekend after everything shut down. And so they were some of the last people that I saw, was our rehearsal together that Thursday afternoon or Thursday morning, when Thursday afternoon all those emails came out from seemingly every organization in New York
That was
and
a scary
beyond.
day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a really wild 4 to 6 p.m. Moment. But yeah, and so I felt there was just a lot of, similar to you, Sidra, there was a lot of communication with them over those first few days of, okay, is rehearsal canceled? Yes, rehearsal is canceled. Is rehearsal the next day canceled? Yes. Okay, everything is shut down. Yes. And so just a lot of, and okay, how am I paying you all still, even though this week is canceled? And um, feeling um, feeling sort of both sides of it as I learn the ways that I want to hold space as a choreographer, whatever, as someone who holds the space for this group, both in terms of the conjuring of the work and also in terms of financial support for these collaborators. And that has been a really important thing for me, is figuring out how, with the loss of work for us, that I'm still finding ways to support them. And that's partly how this virtual residency came about, was from New Dance Alliance offering to continue paying the festival artists. And so therefore offering us this opportunity to continue working and to be supporting these amazing collaborators who I'm lucky to work with. But it's been hard to feel so connected to them because I miss them so much, and it makes me really miss our process and working together. But it's also been really nice because it reminds me of how we can find ways to continue the practice and the process in a very sort of unsexy, product-driven way right now. And I'm sort of enjoying that aspect of it. And yeah, I think it's funny. I was laughing, Sidra, because the way that you were talking about, oh yeah, like, you know, when I first started out and back in the day, and it's like, that is like me right now. I'm like, literally, it's like me in my bedroom with like a sheet and a light bulb, you know, I'm like, it's like, that is like what, like, that is my work, right? You know, it's like, oh my God, like what? Or that's like me with my collaborators doing that at Give Me in a studio, you know, we're just like,
yeah,
you know, just like
I love that part of process.
Totally.
That's the
And
best. That's
totally,
the best.
totally. Yeah. And there's a part of me that's like, oh, I just hope that never changes, you know?
Yeah.
Because it can be just the simplicity and the rawness of that sort of this, yeah, like how you said, like guerrilla style, DIY style working. I love that. So like blood, just like the red blood of it. And so I am very much,
I feel like the traveling.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think that part of it is this sort of effortfulness that makes the body tick, and it allows for, like, the effortfulness, I think, is what got me up every day and out of the door. It's like that kind of weight is so important, and I think, you know, that is will always be. I think we're efforting in a different way now. And through this sort of tunnel, but I think that that's what makes us artists.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. So I agree. And it's been interesting to witness my flows through this. And partly they've been chosen and partly they've been imposed because of consenting to different work structures through this. But it's been interesting for me because I do love to work. I love to do this work. I love to talk about this work. I love to spend my Sunday afternoon sitting here and talking about this. I'm so joyful right now from doing this and being in conversation with you all. And I think it's a gift to love what you do so much. And I honor that. And it feels like a privilege in many ways. And I think sitting in this time has made me realize how incredibly tired I am, and how I also had felt in a similar mode of just constantly producing and product driven and so many performances in so many different spaces and so many so many different invitations to share a 10-minute version or a 15-minute version or a this or that, and so grateful for every single invitation and opportunity to be in space with people and share. And sometimes it does feel just exhausting and like so much. And it's interesting to see how that transfers to this platform. Like in many ways, we can be busier than we were in person right now. And I'm like checking myself on that a bit right now. And it's interesting because there is part of me, when I think about what success is right now and really sort of sit with that and think about it, to me, success is my parents staying alive and well. And success is me staying healthy and my housemates staying healthy and us having, you know, a kind, positive relationship and not killing each other, you know, and that, you know, success is my family in Venezuela not having to go to the hospitals there because the hospitals haven't been functioning there for years, let alone right now during a pandemic. Like those things feel like success right now, and a much more important success than a dance that I make. And so I'm asking questions about that and asking questions about how to slow down as an emerging artist. I think there is this drive to constantly be working and producing and figuring it out and just sort
And
of
to be
in
using
the,
your momentum that you've generated, right?
yeah. And again, it's all things that I'm so grateful for. And I'm asking questions about sustainability within slowness and within being able to use some of this time to really slow down and remember and be reminded of what matters most if you forgot. And yeah, I think that question of success, I just have more questions about it because I definitely don't have answers to it. But I think that's a really important question, and one that I'm certainly asking a lot as an emerging artist right now. Is part of me is like, I don't even know what the dream was, what the dream is, what the dream was. Like a few years ago, I thought I had a certain dream, and I think I just continue listening to what interests me and intrigues me and just yeah, like fills me up in terms of lessons right now. And that has been shifting over the last few years, and I'm learning so much. And so I don't know, part of me is thinking maybe this is the time. I've been talking about this with a couple emerging friends, but it's like, is now the time when we go to grad school? Like, should we do that right now, if the next couple years for dance is just going to be like such a question mark and really challenging financially for sort of support and sharing work and seeing work and all of the things. There's part of me that's sort of asking that question, not in a real concrete way yet, but an MFA is something that I've, you know, pondered and wondered and dreamt of being able to do and participate in a MFA program. And there's part of me that's imagining right now that having the support and structure and learning time of an institution might not be such a bad use of the next few years. So we'll see. I'm not doing anything about it other than having that thought. But
Yeah, letting it percolate in your mind. I think it's been in my mind too. I think for me, the sort of like subtext of an MFA has always been, if you want a job in a university, if you want like you need a terminal degree to teach in a university, and the arts are so like, how do you like, like for science, for chemistry, there's something that's like pretty clear about it, and then for the arts, it's a little harder to like type it down and write it on a piece of paper. You have to see it and feel it. So yeah, it's a question mark. I think the resources are the biggest draw for me. Like there's a field of dancers who are all there that you don't have to, you're not paying necessarily, you're paying them for they're getting paid in experience in a way. Reciprocity in the art making process has always been very hard, important but hard. And I think now it makes it even a bigger question about like, who is process for? Like how does it work? Like how does it work in the sense of like what does it do for you now? Like what does it do for them now? What does it do for the institution now? Like how does process facilitate an artistic thing that is still beyond us, that is still like in some sense universal, in some sense, but still tangible? I think that's a big question for, I think it was always a question, like who is your process for? And like, is it for you? Is it for your dancers? Is it for your audience? I think there's some companies who like kind of don't care about the audience at all. Like, not at all, but like when making work, it's about the experience that they're having and that the audience can sort of bear witness to it. And then there's different modes of performance, I think, that are audience centric. And then yeah, but now things have changed so suddenly. Like, where does that leave us? Good nods. Yeah.
Well, I think having gotten an MFA many years ago, I think those questions were the same as like it was, what can the institution do for me? Do I need the institution? I had those same conundrums, and I think no matter whether you're in the institution or not, you're constantly making your experience. And so, I spoke with the number of mentors as I was deciding whether to do an MFA. And I think it ultimately was about having the people to work with and the studio space and time. But I think I could have also done that on my own.
Yeah.
So the choice, the choice is to really commit to making your experience no matter where you are. And I think you can find resources of mentorship wherever you are. It doesn't not have to be within the institution.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's a important thing about the institution's access? Because I know that that's a big question for everybody. Like, can you get studio space? Can you afford it? Can you, and so on and so forth. Like, how does that fit into the framework of university work?
I mean, I'm always doubtful of institutions. I think I had this whole like blog I wrote. It was like one sentence. I think it was like institutions creating institutions. I can't remember exactly how I framed it. It was just like this stream of thought. I don't know. There's no resolute answer to, I think we all have very different experiences and relationships to institutional structures.
Mm-hmm.
I like floating through them. I kind of have resisted. I've been in academia a lot, but I'm not married to one place. And so I've been really lucky to have structured my career in that way. I think no matter where you are, there's going to be a problem. But also problems can be great. Problems working against something is why there's friction and tension in our work. So I've enjoyed the structure that I've been able to manifest, and that there's a sense of working against something, but I also have a lot of liberty within that. Right now, I'm kind of in the phase of questioning maybe the next like 20 years of life, and how do I facilitate a more sustainable economy for life and living, whereas in the past 20 years, it's more been about discovering my relationship to things that exist, and sometimes rejecting them and sometimes needing them. So
yeah, definitely. Marion, I think a question to ask that's like sort of the opposite end of things is what your experience has been sort of pursuing those resources.
Pursuing resources just in New York as
New York and
as a
yeah.
performer maker. It's been a lot of learning. I think, Sidra, you mentioned mentorship, and I think for me in this bushwhacking career that we find ourselves in, having mentors has been, I don't think I would be, I know I would not be where I am today without the mentors that I have and have had and keep close, whether that be, some of my first dance teachers when I returned to dancing in my early 20s when I was living in New Orleans, and some of my best friends from building this grassroots organization there, whether that be my first dance teacher, whether that be someone who's a very current mentor for me right now in the city. And I think having mentorship as a younger artist, as an emerging artist, forever probably feels incredibly important. I think so many of us this weekend are feeling incredibly heavy with the loss of Nancy Stark-Smith, who I know was a mentor for so many and a mentor of my mentors. And I think witnessing the community, just the outpouring, the absolute outpouring on social media and in emails over the last few days feels like such a testament to mentorship and to the lessons that people in this field give and that teachers offer and makers offer. And so I think for me, in terms of feeling supported, or I forget exactly what your question was posing, but for me, it's been so much about mentorship and connection and truly listening and learning. I think that has been the most important part of figuring out what I want to continue learning and the communities within our community that I want to really show up for and be part of and learn from. And yeah, I think that is the process of figuring out how to do that right now. I don't know what that looks like. But yeah, I think it feels like a combination of listening and showing up.
Yeah.
I
Listening.
think right now there's really an outpouring, more, maybe I wasn't as plugged in, but I think there's really been an outpouring of generosity. I've really sat in on more panels and artist talks and live viewings and than I've ever had, I think. And, just meeting people from all over the world through these like access points. So I think there's something exciting about that I hope will remain, because the resources actually are abundant, but sometimes maybe our like area of involvement can be limited. But there's just so much. There's so much out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the largest institutions, to call it that I feel lucky to participate in a few different ways is Give Me. And as far as sort of New York venues and studios go, Give Me feels representative of kind of a larger institution. And I have been so blown away by the level of humanity that I have been able to witness and feel supported by from the Give Me family and team, both through the transition to online teaching practices and just the support of figuring that out. But also the week that the pandemic began was actually the first week of a residency that I was supposed to have at Give Me this spring with Darren Wright through the Solo for Solo program that Eva began there last year. And so the premise of Solo for Solo is that an emerging artist makes a solo on a sort of developed mid-career artist performer, and you're paired together. And so there are 3 different groups, and I am paired with Darren Wright. And we hadn't even begun before the pandemic shut everything down. And it's been really interesting to be in conversation with the teams of Solo for Solo and be in conversation with Give Me because we are transitioning to a virtual residency. And so Darren and I have sort of begun, he's in West Virginia building a bathroom right now. So it's also just like, what does anything look like right now in terms of process and sharing and communication.
Pandemic and home improvement are like
exactly
linked right now. I don't know.
yes. Like, anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But it's been a really interesting experience to get sort of a taste of how an institution can show up with so many resources of support, both saying like, yes, we will continue to pay you your commission because this residency will not be canceled, it'll just transfer. And they haven't made a call on it officially, but likely the show in June will be virtual. And that call will most likely happen this week. But yeah, we will be in process and we will do a completely virtual residency and a virtual performance at the end of the residency it was going to be in early June, but I think it'll probably get shifted to the end of June for the online platform of it. But it's been a really incredible experience to witness the kindness and the humanity of the Give Me curation team and production team, of really feeling seen and heard and supported by them to do whatever we feel like we need to do and make whatever we feel like we need to make right now, and have the process look like whatever the process needs to look like based on how everyone is and where everyone is, and the spaces everyone feels able to sort of give and generate in.
Yeah. Want to ask, since we're on this subject anyway, and I feel like since we're artists in process right now, I think something to ask about process is maybe like a bit more nuts and bolts, which is something like where it might be interesting to hear where your process begins when you're creating work or when you're researching ideas, like how it works for you to start developing physical ideas, or do you start globally? Do you start in space? Like what your inspirations tend to be for diving into new ideas about composition of the space or composition of the body, or the rigor, the effort of what goes on on the stage or in whatever performance space you end up using. I think that's something that's really interesting to people to hear about.
Are you asking pre-COVID or post-COVID, or just general, both?
Who knows? I mean, like,
Okay.
I think in general, like, I think
Yeah.
for me, it's, you know, I feel, well, I don't know. Go ahead.
Over the past few years, like 5 years, I think it's been multiple designers in the space, whether that's actually virtually. I was using Zoom a few years ago
Yeah.
with this Swedish band that the company was working with. And a lot of what we were doing, we would have on-site residencies in New York and in Sweden with the dancers and the band in the same space, generating and improvising and generating source material for the piece. It was funded by National Dance Project. But there were a lot of floating times when we weren't together, so we'd have to sort of virtually send information or have these sort of brainstorming meetings on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really a 3-year process. And because there were so many designers involved, it felt like we couldn't really, it almost had to be like a Pinterest board of information.
Yeah.
Like the set, the set design was being kind of laid out as pictures and schematics. And then we had the music, which was being put into drop boxes. And then the dance, which was happening in real time, mostly in New York, and then in different residencies on the East Coast. And we had the producing elements, the agents that were involved. So it was all these sort of things that were sort of coming together like a puzzle and really couldn't be looked at in this sort of linear way.
Mm-hmm.
And I point to that project. It was called Monster Outside. It premiered in New Orleans, actually, at the Contemporary Arts Center. But because it was such a long process, it was almost impossible to look at it in this sort of one-directional way. It was almost like an anatomy of a piece. And then as we came closer to the premiere, August, September, October, November, we had some really like core residencies where all these elements started to kind of come together like a Rubik's Cube. And I think that's pretty typical of my process. I like to have sort of a smorgasbord of ideas in this space, working modularly and with a lot of different like inspiration boards and music playing and people working on assignments in the space and tasks. And over a period of like 9 months, I think a piece comes together, like the core ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And then over another few years, you're starting to produce it in different spaces. The most recent work that we were to premiere in Slovenia was sort of the same thing. It was with a Slovenian choir director, and she composed a piece of music. I actually went to Slovenia in November to sort of outline the piece with her and a visual designer, projection artist. And so we had another timeline that was developed with just the singers, and my dancers weren't there. So I had to kind of imagine what that would be. And we were just starting to put it in motion in March when COVID became more of an issue. And we had a residency at BAD in the Bronx, actually, and we sort of started to have the piece form, and we were supposed to leave on March 11th to go to Slovenia. So again, it was sort of like this tentacle of different things that were going to be happening in that piece with like projection panels and the live chorus, and it was going to happen in a church space. And so I like to work in that way. I think that those two bigger projects are sort of the way I've always been working, like having all these components sort of start to arrive and build and accumulate over many months or years sometimes.
Yeah, it feels like I'm picturing all these pieces sort of falling in like gravity and like collecting and becoming hot and thick and dense. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
And I love revisiting work, 5 years later, that those works, when you reframe them on a new group of dancers, they tend to become more distal, and you're like, oh yeah, that was the idea. Throw that all away, as you restage them on new groups. And like we just did a restaging in February at Gelsey Kirkland Art Center, and there was a totally new group of dancers, and that piece had been created in 2013, and it just was tighter. You know, it was like when you're in a work and you're making a work, you have this sort of sense of possession and almost indulgence. And I think when you look back at a work, you're like, that's not necessary, throw that out. This is the core of the piece. So it was just tighter, and we're like, okay, yeah, that's it. You know, it lives as an archival piece now.
Nice. Yeah.
I think it's been interesting as well for me to be learning so much in this time of practices that I can continue post-pandemic as well. Like I laughed earlier, like I had no idea really what Zoom was before this started, and that is fully true. And now I'm sort of wondering, why didn't I know what Zoom was, and why didn't I use Zoom? Because 2 of my collaborators are based in Pittsburgh. And it would just be this thing of, oh, well, we just can't rehearse because Anna and Taylor are only in the city for these 2 weeks this month or whatever, you know, and obviously there's so much lost from not being able to be fully in person, but it has been really interesting. You know, this whole spring, it was just, you know, figuring out what our schedule would be for our May residency going into this June performance was like, schedules. And for me, a big learning curve of the first group work that I make in New York, making group work in New Orleans, so different, obviously, than working with 7 incredibly talented, incredibly busy artists here. And then within the first week of the pandemic, we all get on a Zoom call together. And I'm like, this is amazing. We are all in the same place at the same time. Wow, you know, and it was just this beautiful moment of being together and realizing that, oh, you know, there are certain practices that we are engaging with now and skills we are learning right now that I think will continue with my process to some extent in terms of connection. And it's been interesting. I also feel like my process exists as a collage and collaging of lots of different things falling into place through a process of work and listening and time. And it's been interesting to see how that can sort of transfer to a virtual platform. And my collaborators and I have not been doing live rehearsals in person. That has not been a choice that we have made for this new format. Instead, I have been sending them prompts, and in their own time, in their own space, and in their own monitored sort of time, they attend to the prompt and respond and have various, for this residency, they've had various media that they can respond with. One of them is movement, and literally making a video that is movement and sending it to me, drawing, writing, recording themselves talking as a response. One of my collaborators is really into carpentry right now, and she's like doing all these carpentry projects, and so that is an option. And then I vocalize and sing as part of my practice, and my collaborators, that is part of our process as well. And so that is another one of the media that we are able to use to sort of research and continue this process. And that has been really interesting I miss being with them in space, and I miss what can happen from all being together and working together and practicing a score together, of course. But it has been really interesting to see these pieces of our research coming and transmitting over the internet into our Google Drive folder, and see that the work really is continuing right now, and the research really is continuing. And I think it's going to completely change what this dance becomes. And I feel really grateful to totally not know what's happening with this project and totally not know where it's going, in a very exciting way, because of how much this process is informing, I think, what will get made ultimately when we're able to be back in person.
Yeah.
That sounds really exciting.
Yeah. I'm always so interested in like, maybe to go back a little bit to like the many skills that we need as artists, like also singing, vocalizing, and like there's so much work that involves singing. Is that like something that you were interested in before? You said you took like, there was a period of time when you went back to dance. which meant you were like sort of doing something else. Has singing and vocalizing always been part of your
process?
self?
Yeah. So I sang growing up. I sang, it was sort of a Western training in a choir, and sort of was in musical theater
Mm-hmm.
sort of land as a kid. And then when I went to undergrad, that really shifted. And even in high school, it was shifting more into just dancing and sort of kind of capital D dancing. And then it was more going to dance festivals in college that introduced me to this wider dance field that I now find myself a part of. And vocalizing for me, so I stopped dancing for a couple of years. I stopped training professionally for a couple of years right after undergrad, and sort of traveled around and moved around to many different places, and had jobs. Just, I worked at a urban farm. I worked for a long-term dropout prevention program, and continued to practice in my body, but wasn't training professionally. And it was moving to New Orleans that brought me back to dancing. And I thought I was going to be there for forever. And that's where I started performing again, and that's where I started making work as adult outside of school, and that's where I started doing sort of community organizing within dance and teaching dance as well. And when all of those practices and connecting with people brought me up to New York, it was definitely a process of figuring out how to maintain a certain level of work-life balance that is easier to find in smaller cities, especially New Orleans, and harder to find in a place like New York for many different reasons. And I think that's a balance I'm still trying to strike and find, and probably will for decades. But yeah, I think it's been interesting to navigate how my sort of process has shifted. And singing came in a few years ago. When did it come in? In maybe 2017 or 2018, so recent-ish. I was a part of the first landing program, that is a program that Miguel Gutierrez offers in partnership with Gibney. And I participated in it the first year of it, when he was just very much like, I don't know what landing is. Like, what is landing? And we were sort of the guinea pig class with him. And that was just a very special year. And some of my, very closest colleagues and friends I met through landing. And it was just such a special year and such a special group. It was the year that the election of Donald Trump happened. It was that sort of calendar time, because we had a landing residency right after that week, which was a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
But also good to be with those folks right when that was happening. Anyway, but he brought a couple artists who vocalize as part of their practice to landing as guest artists. And they led us in a few different vocalizing practices. And I think for me, it was the first time that vocalizing really cracked open to me in an embodied movement practice way, since being a kid and sort of singing in choir or singing in musicals. And it just brought me so much pleasure and so much joy. And I, at the time, was a workup artist at Gibney, and I was working on this dance that I did with my mom. She was sort of a guest performer in the piece with me, and she's a singer, not professionally, but she sings and has a singing practice. And I grew up in a house where she was always singing. And so she actually sang in the piece. And so sort of vocalizing and singing was part of that work. And I just started singing in those rehearsals, partly because I would be really nervous, and singing calmed me down. And then I think it became aware to me that was sort of more part of the process and more part of what the piece was and what my practice was. And then since that work has evolved, and I have a loop pedal and an amp, and I sort of build different soundscapes, and the way that I use my voice has shifted a lot with different processes that I've been in since that piece. But it's a huge part of my practice now. And it's actually that was the first piece for me that I felt really good about practicing in the pandemic. Was when I didn't really want to be dancing yet, and felt like I didn't want to take Zoom dance class, and didn't want to be doing my own movement practice in my bedroom. I wanted to be singing. And that was really that was sort of the first piece of my practice that returned actually in the pandemic, was vocalizing. So I'm, forever learning a lot, but certainly learning a lot right now, and practicing a lot right now.
Very cool. So we're getting on in time just a little bit. So let's move a little bit into some like quick answer questions. Maybe the one that's like kind of fun to ask is, what is something that you're really grateful for in this time that's going on? Something that you collected or learned or experienced that's been really good for you, or that you appreciate a lot, something that really stuck with you. I know for me, it's learning how, I think for me, it's learning how staying involved with my dancers and my community and my friends and reconnecting with people has been really sort of the lifeblood of surviving the insanity of being alone so much.
Well, I'm with my parents, so a lot of our time has just been so precious, just being together. And again, I think in motion for me was just wanting to be home more. I travel almost like 6 months out of the year. So I think wanting that and finally getting that has just been precious. And I feel even more connected to, extended family too. We're just in constant communication now. I think not having the liberty of just going over to an aunt's house or my sister's house and her kids is, maybe I wasn't doing that as much before anyway, but I miss it more now. So like the times when they drive by our house and stay at a distance and say hi, they've been by twice, my sister and her 2 sons. Those moments are so, they're just so joyful.
Yeah.
So those have been really special moments. I had an aunt that actually had the virus, and we were on high alert for a while. And when she got out of the hospital, again, like you start to realize like what's not necessary. And, just having her be well was like the highlight of this entire 8 weeks. And I think the privilege of being able to interact with 40 students every week, that has kept me going, even in the dark moments where we were scared, and like having those checkpoints and having to like interface with people in this way and keep them on track has kept me in a positive space. So yeah, I have a lot to be grateful for.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's actually a question that I asked my high schoolers who I teach, is something that you're grateful for. And I feel like I am so grateful for them, and feel similarly to Sidra, of like being able to see students regularly and come together in space, as weirdly as we can right now, but still feels like coming together in space in some way, shape, or form. So I feel really grateful for that, and for spaces to be together. I feel incredibly grateful to live near Prospect Park. That's probably not where you were going with what are we grateful for, but
Totally. It's fine.
I used to live over in Bushwick for years, and I moved down to South Brooklyn, closer to the park, almost 2 years ago, and just could not be more grateful for just access to trees, to like go walk around trees is really, really nice.
I was there. Sorry, go ahead. I was there yesterday. I took off my shoes and I touched the grass for the first time in a long time. Ugh.
Yeah.
So important.
Yep. And then I guess the last
so
thing
fragrant right now too.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And I feel grateful to be near my parents. They live about an hour outside of the city in Stamford, Connecticut. And they both are still healthy, and I'm being very careful right now. So we're trying to figure out a way to do a social distance Mother's Day walk or something. And I feel really prematurely grateful that might get to happen, because we are close-ish by to each other. So
Amazing. Cool. And then we'll do the last question, which we do every week, which is who are some artists or creators or dancers who you think are really great, who you think are awesome, but who you think maybe don't get as much, or maybe like under the radar right now, who you really think are people you love to watch, love asking this question because it really, I think right now there's a lot, everybody's just trying to stay relevant and throwing out like everything they can on social media. And so it really helps to, it's just really good to like not get inundated with like Batshevas and NDTs and Hubbard Streets. Like, of course they're great and we should watch them too, but also it's a great time to like sit down and look at new artists and see the people that we love, but maybe not so many people know about yet, or
There's a really good, I mean, I think I've been mentoring 2 MFA students during this time of isolation, one at UArts and one at Hollins. They're doing really different research. One is doing research on her relationship to her Filipino heritage and a sense like of displacement. And the other is kind of working with Afrofuturism, both which are out of my field of like what I make art about. So it's been really great just having those meetings with them, and I've been giving them different readings that I've discovered. Like we were reading Ishmael Houston Jones and looking at the work of Kaneza Shaw. Kaneza Shaw, I think she's an incredible director, really works with like visual and design and movement design and vocal design. And I just think her work is so rich. I actually saw her work for the first time in New Orleans. So now in this period of isolation, I've been like reconnecting with some of the online offerings on the boards, and got to watch another full length piece of hers, and I discussed it with my MFA mentee. So that's been great to kind of, again, these platforms of like sharing full length works is something we wouldn't necessarily always get. And I was really touched by her work when I saw it live. So to be able to like look at it again and speak about it with my student and see what things sort of connected for his ongoing research was really cool recently.
Nice.
Three sort of dear friends and colleagues whose just their names immediately jumped into my head were Stephanie Acosta, Jess Pretty, and Kayla Farish. And they're 3 makers and choreographer friends of mine. And all 3 of them actually had really exciting shows coming up that were canceled immediately because of the pandemic. And my thoughts and heart was with them a lot in the first few weeks. Stephanie and Jess's shows were both intended to be at the Chocolate Factory. Stephanie's literally the week that everything got shut down. They were in tech. And Jess's show was supposed to be the first weekend of April, maybe the first 2. And Kayla had a performance at Give Me that was also canceled at the end of March. And they are 3 just unbelievably kind and generous artists, and I love their work, and I learned so much from watching their work and being in conversation with them. And yeah, I'm excited to see how their work changes and shifts during this time as a result of this time. And I'm really excited to get to watch those works, or whatever the next version is of those works that did not get to be shared. Because they're pretty magic, I think.
Cool. Yeah, amazing. Well, I think that's about time for us. Any last thoughts that we want to share before we bounce out of here?
It was fun being with Marion. I saw her maybe 5 years ago on stage. So that's the first interaction we had. Yeah, for Mishigaya dance. So it was fun to be in conversation.
Yeah, it was such an honor to get to be in conversation with you, Sidra. I admire you so much as a choreographer and as a teacher, and also just as a human. And so it was really, it was a treat to get to be in conversation with you. Thank you. And thank you, Kevin, for bringing us together.
My pleasure.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, such a nice, down-to-earth, open talk. I really appreciated it.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see you all soon. Next week, we'll have some really amazing people on as well. We'll be announcing them soon. You can follow Sidra at Sidra Bell Dance New York, and then Marion Spencer, I think it's just at Marion Spencer, right? Great. Find them on the Instagrams, find them on Facebook. You can find all their information wherever you find information. Well, have a good day. Bye, everybody.